Almost since the beginning of time, man has been asking the question, what time is it? What time is it? What time is it?
Welcome to Time on Your Hands. I'm obviously not Karen Paul, but I have my monthly stint on the first Wednesday of each month. My name is Bryan Doughty, and I'm here with my friend Ronna Stellar.
Hi, Bryan. Nice to be here in the guest seat.
Yeah, the last time I was here with Ronna, she was interviewing me.
Yeah, we were in reverse position.
So I'm hoping to have a great conversation with Ronna about some of things that have happened in her life, leading up to some of the things today and some of the events going on in New London. I know one of the big events tonight was going to be Eat in the Street.
Right.
Which unfortunately it's Eat in the Rain in the Street, which I think moved inside.
Yes, it moved inside, and the good thing is, I guess now that people can park on the street to eat inside.
Yeah, the plan was to have Bank Street closed so you could eat in the street, literally, which was, I think, a super exciting idea. But unfortunately, the weather didn't cooperate. But I've understood, looking at some Facebook posts of different pictures, that there are a lot of people in New London eating at various restaurants. And actually, one of the things I wrote to Ronna this morning and asked her if she'd be a guest because I had a cancellation, and I told her I'd take her out to Kindee, which is one of my new favorite restaurants in New London, which
we've been takeout from. I'm not really ready to eat inside a restaurant yet, I have to say. We've been vaccinated, but I just feel better outdoors than indoors still.
Sure.
But there are really a lot of great restaurants in New London, and that one is definitely on our rotation.
I definitely recommend it. And it's interesting, you mentioned about not being comfortable. And I've gone out to restaurants a lot, but what I haven't been comfortable with yet, I say yet, I'm hoping soon, is when you're in a grocery store or CVS or Walgreens and you take that next aisle and there's a whole bunch of people, and it feels weird to look at people and turn around.
It is weird. And some of the stores that don't have arrows to tell you what direction to be in, I think I was at Lowe's or Home Depot or something, and it was, I guess we've gotten used to this certain level of orderliness when being in potentially crowded places, and when there are spots that it's kind of random, like someone's in the middle of the aisle and you don't know like which way they're going to come out. Our lives have really changed a lot from a year and a half ago.
I think they've changed a great deal. It's and I think what some of us, including myself, maybe you as well, I forget what normal was or is, because I've gotten used to the arrows. And the same thing happened to me. I was in ShopRite the other day and went, do we go up or down? Or I don't know where to go, and I don't know if I need the arrows, but I've gotten used to the arrows. And I do hope. I've been vaccinated. I guess I'm not fully vaccinated because I had my second shot last week. I think it takes 2 weeks. I got the Pfizer shot. It was fun. I had a nice headache for a day or two, but I'm hoping we move forward. And I know Connecticut was recently seeing that we're leading the pack in terms of vaccination, so it's nice to see Connecticut in the front of something. It is,
because it isn't often that way. And I was vaccinated. Leadsley Health District held some clinics right at Jennings School, and I got in on that, and so I guess I had my second shot on March 20th. So
That's because you're a little older than I am.
I think you're about the same age as my kids.
That's fine. I'm glad you got vaccinated. But you bring up an interesting thing. We had talked a little bit about this before we got on the air. We may be seeing in action a healthcare system that could work for everybody without the fear of going and getting a bill. Which I think I got tested 2 or 3 times. Once at the high school in New London, once at down on Bank Street, somewhere in there.
Community Health Center.
Community Health Center, correct. And you drove up, you held your nose up.
Yes.
They scraped your brain, and you left, and you got a result.
Within 48 or 72 hours.
Right, and there was no cost. I know you're passionate about this.
Yeah.
Maybe not COVID, but this in general.
Yes, this subject I am passionate about. And I was always interested in the subject, but it seemed like the last year and a half, it's really come to the forefront. I sure you remember that in February of 2020, before COVID, or maybe it was the start of COVID, but we didn't know it yet, City Council passed a resolution supporting having a universal health care system. And part of the reason, it was a unanimous vote, which we expected it to pass. We really didn't expect it to pass unanimously. And I think one of the reasons it did is we looked a lot at the city budget, and I know you've looked at the Board of Ed budget, and Jeff Hart was sort of working to give us Board of Ed numbers. And the amount of money that our city spends on health insurance for both current employees and retirees is amazing. I think it's the second line item after wages. And the Board of Ed had experienced a big jump in health insurance rates a couple years ago. And no one, even the people who are most attached to our current system, no one claimed that or believed that we were getting better coverage for that extra money.
I think we're fortunate. You're talking about 2020, but we just recently on the Board of Ed got our rates back, and they were lower than expected. But it doesn't mean you're getting any more coverage.
Once again, and the high deductible plans now that so many people have really do discourage them from seeing the doctor. Mm-hmm. And they're just weird things. When you have a for-profit insurance company, and I remember when Anthem bought out Blue Cross Blue Shield, I was covered by them, and one summer I got a $900 check because they demutualized, and basically the difference was it used to be the people that were insured were the shareholders, and that's who they were responsible for. Yeah, but we got our $900 check, we got bought out, and then the shareholders became number one and the patients became number two. So I think it all went downhill from there. That was maybe in the late 1990s.
Yeah, I know, speaking for myself as a military family, I hadn't really thought about healthcare at all through 20 years, because you go to the doctor when you go to the doctor, and you don't really get a bill, but sometimes you get what looks like a bill saying what you might have paid, and sometimes it's just astronomical. I mean, I know I had knee surgery, and I think it was $25,000 for 3 hours. Yeah. They did important things, but
right.
But such a short amount of time and such a huge cost, which if you had to pay for that, I'm sure would just completely bankrupt so many individuals. And I do hope, if there's a positive coming out of COVID, and I know there's not a lot of them, that maybe we can see what a healthcare system would look like in action. I mean, think about the vaccines. It wasn't a perfect rollout.
Right.
But we've never done it before.
Right. And I think the part that was made more difficult because we don't have that system is that at least early in the rollout, when old people like myself were looking for the vaccine, it seemed like every one of my friends was getting the vaccine through a different route. There were some people who were getting it at pharmacies, or their primary care physicians got it, or they were... Some friends had to drive to New Britain, and I was lucky, and I got an email from Keishla from the City of New London saying, let people know that Ledge Light is having this vaccine clinic at Jennings School. So I got to go to Jennings School and had no trouble getting an appointment, but it seemed as though each of us had a different story of how we got it.
I would say absolutely. I looked online. And then I called the hospital, Yale New Haven in New London, whatever the number was, and they set me up for an appointment. And then I called up the next day to try to get one quicker, and they said, "How about this afternoon?" Everybody's different, and I know now I think they're doing walk-ins now at certain places.
I've been seeing that.
So I almost want to say it's fascinating. And I don't remember which scientist it was. It was on one of the news networks, and he was saying you actually get to see all this play out in real time.
Yeah, it is fascinating. But the one great thing is whether people decide to get tested or not, whether people decide to get the vaccine or not, the consideration isn't a financial one.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's amazing in our country, where I think health coverage has always been at least in my lifetime, an issue. I know you had mentioned you were in Israel
Right.
when you were not as old as you are now.
Right, much younger, 50 years ago. But my kids were born there, and the healthcare was not at all frilly, but it was medically exactly what was needed. About a year and a half ago, I became involved with this grassroots group, Medicare for All Connecticut, which is in the process of formalizing because we know it's really going to be a long fight. But at the time, it was very grassroots, and it was funny that like half the people in this group were people who had lived out of the country at some point, and who had experienced other kinds of health care.
Wow, that's actually, it's kind of fascinating, and they're attempting to do something here.
Yeah, one person grew up in Germany. There's a legislator, a state legislator in Stamford, David Michel, who's worked closely with the group, and he lived in France till he was 14. And so many of the people who were involved in it are just people who experienced this kind of health care at some point in their life, and kind of had an idea of what it would look like. And it's hard to demonstrate to Americans who have never seen something like that it really does work, and you really don't have long lines for appointments. And
Well, I think a change in general is hard.
change is hard, yeah.
We get stuck in our ways. And actually, one of the questions for you, I'm not saying you're stuck in your ways, Ronna.
I try not to be, but
I think COVID has changed a lot of us, and I'm wondering for you what aspect, besides going out to dinner, what other changes have happened to you, or maybe you've experienced with COVID over the last year or so?
I feel as though, I've been very fortunate, and in fact, I have to say I'm really glad to see that Connecticut is doing such a great job at vaccinating people, but I felt kind of unfairly advantaged earlier on when it was just age-based, because I'm 71 and I was in early, not the very first group, but the second group, and I felt really bad that I could distance myself well. I could really reduce exposure to the rest of the world pretty easily. I could shop curbside. Didn't have to go to work. And a lot of younger people who were forced to go to jobs and be in contact with the public were being put at risk, and that I could have avoided. So I understand the governor's rationale, and he might have been right, because we have gotten a very high percentage, but I was kind of feeling some guilt about it. My life has not changed as much as some people's, because I was already retired. I've gotten more, domestic. I've baked more bread in the last year.
This isn't a bad thing.
It isn't a bad thing. When my kids were young and I was kind of a stay-at-home person, I used to bake a lot of bread, and then when I had a 9-to-5 job, I really didn't bake any bread, because it's not hard, but you can't walk in and out of it. You have to be home for a stretch of time. And so I've kind of gotten into this domestic mode that I think is going to be hard for me to be really social and outgoing again.
So for you, I know you're on different committees in New London, and you're doing probably Zoom for most
We are.
I've been thinking about it where our Board of Ed, because of different regulations, we've been on Zoom most of the time. And the one thing we've lost is Ronna and I, if we're on the same committee, having a little conversation before we go in saying,
right,
what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And I'm hoping we're going to be going back by mid-May. But our group who got elected, the Board of Ed, we only had a month and a half or 2 months before we were pulled out. So what we know is Zoom, but for planning and zoning, more.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. I know that the chair of planning and zoning does not prefer to chair Zoom meetings. For me, being kind of a short person and having our meetings, before city hall was under renovation, up in the council chambers, and with me sitting not at the end, but close to the end. It's actually a lot easier to get recognized when I raise my hand in a Zoom meeting because the fact that I'm short doesn't matter.
Sure.
So I think that aspect I like better, but it is true that you don't get any kind of, not even whether you say anything, but you don't really get a feel of the room going in, whether, and it isn't, when there have been some controversial issues, it's different seeing a lot of names on the participant list or a lot of, windows on the screen. It's a different feel from having an auditorium full of people.
I would agree. It's been interesting. I do some of the building committees in New London for the schools, and another positive, I guess, is some of our contractors don't have to drive in, and we can have a meeting, and they don't have to leave. They can go from meeting to meeting. And one of our heads of department actually said for the city of New London, they've enjoyed some of the Zoom meetings because they can go and listen to meetings they've never been able to listen to before, because you can pop in or you can listen in your office or whatever. And I think that's a positive, and I kind of hope we do a hybrid moving forward. I'm not in favor of all Zoom meetings, but it does allow some of the public to come in, or an employee who might not have been able to come in the past. And I guess we'll see what happens moving forward.
It will be interesting. I know that we have had commissioners who were on vacation who could call into Zoom meetings, which they would have had to miss otherwise. So we'll see. I have to tell you, the Connecticut Green Party, in spite of, we're supposed to be environmentalists, there was an
Wait,
old...
Ronna, you're not?
Well, we are, but in spite of that, people are just not that consistent. We used to have monthly meetings in person. I know Connecticut's a small state, but in the Middletown or Durham or Portland area, and people would drive from all over the state to go to these monthly meetings. And Zoom allows it to be much more inclusive without forcing people to get into their cars. And we will be going back to a hybrid. I think business meetings will continue to be remote, and maybe quarterly we'll have, topic-oriented meetings or more social or outreach type things where we sit in the same room together. But just to get business conducted, I think we're going to stick with remote.
I think we will too, and I think also, we had this technology in the past, so you could bring in a guest from California or wherever. They didn't have to fly in. We just didn't really use the technology. We would fly people in to come to a meeting, but we can go into Japan, or there's a time zone difference, obviously.
Right.
But you can bring in a guest from around the globe and have them present or have them talk to you. And I think that's fascinating. I truly hope we continue to do that and take advantage of the technology we have, even though it was already there, or as the former Apple CEO said when he said, "No one knew you needed 30,000 songs in your pocket till I told you."
Right.
And unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But I think sometimes you have to be told certain things. So you mentioned the Green Party.
Yeah.
And you are.
Oh, well, I'm the chair of the New London Green Party.
Right.
Actually, I'm the secretary of the state Green Party. So those are the meetings I really can't miss. Actually, Myrna and I are kind of co-chairs of the New London Green Party, but I'm on the state paperwork because you can only put one name on. Our bylaws have something weird. We don't have chair and secretary. We have meeting chair and records chair. So she's the meeting chair and I'm the records chair. Yeah, I've been a Green since 2004. I was a Democrat for 30 years. I didn't actually register to vote till I was 24 years old because when I turned 18, the voting age was 21. And when I turned 21, I lived in Israel and felt I didn't know if I was going to spend the rest of my life there or not. I didn't know what was going on. So I didn't vote. I didn't register to vote until we came back to the States when I was 24.
So let me interrupt you just for a second. So why did you go to Israel?
Gosh, I had friends there.
That's a good reason.
Yeah, so, and I knew a little Hebrew. Bob did not know Hebrew. I don't know, we were crazy young people. He's from Oregon, I'm from Philadelphia. We met at University of Chicago, and we dropped out. We got married and dropped out, or dropped out and got married,
Something
or something
happened.
like that. And he didn't really want to get drafted. I mean, looking back at it, Israel seems like the stupidest place in the world to go if you want to be somewhere less military oriented than the United States. But we had friends there, and I knew some Hebrew, and Bob was game to do it. And most of our friends lived on kibbutzim, and we were interested in seeing what that socialist lifestyle was like. And we were indeed members of a kibbutz in Israel we were there for 4.5 years, and for the last two years we were members of a kibbutz called Adamit, which is way in the northwest corner of Israel, so close to Lebanon that you could see into Lebanon. It was like half a kilometer from the border, and it was elevated. It was at about 600 meters above sea level, and there was sort of a wadi to the north, and then up the other side of that wadi was Lebanon. So I like the lifestyle there, but we were there for the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and my younger son was born on day 4 of the Yom Kippur War, which was quite the experience. When I went into labor at 9:30 at night, we needed to call the army to have a half-track escorting us down the hill to go
Ronna, how many people get to say they got an army escort while they were in labor? That's
right. And then when we got to the hospital in Nahariya, which was the closest city, the ambulance driver didn't really know where to go because the regular obstetrics ward had been cleared out for the potential of wounded soldiers who had not shown up in that area at that time. And I ended up giving birth in this nursing school classroom, and it was set up like the Madeline books, with the 2 rows of beds. And I don't know, there were maybe a dozen women, in these 2 rows of beds. And luckily I had a very short labor, and by 1 a.m. I was all set. And I spent all night watching women give birth. It was really quite interesting.
Well, it sounds like an adventure.
It was an adventure. But after that war, it really seemed like things changed there, and I don't want to get into Israeli politics there. And also the place where we lived was having some internal conflict, and the people who we were best friends with were the ones who were leaving, and the people we weren't best friends with were the ones who were staying. And we also thought that, it was time for Bob to deal with his legal issues, that he hadn't gone into the U.S. military while we were in Israel. He had also not gone into the Israeli military while we were in Israel. But we thought, he isn't, couldn't just run away from those legal problems forever. Grandparents would want to see grandkids. And so we came back in March of 1974, which was a good time to come back. Richard Nixon was in the middle of his problems. Gerald Ford had already said that he was going to have an amnesty program, but Nixon was still in office, and it didn't really happen. The Department of Justice didn't have much incentive to really prosecute people, and the charges against Bob were dropped the night before he was going to go to trial, because I guess they had missed a step when they indicted him. I don't know. We kind of lucked out. Yeah. It was just
well, it's a positive thing.
It was a positive thing. I mean, I was in Oregon with 2 young kids, and we had kind of anticipated he'd spend 6 months in this minimal security, like work camp. And
maybe in the future, Ronna, you could send them away for 6 months.
Maybe. At the time, though, I was pretty happy to not be on my own in a,
Sure.
in a strange state, strange in more ways than one, I guess, living in the rural life. But it was interesting, and the years in Israel, and especially as kibbutz members, did kind of impact some of the way I see things.
Sure. And you'd mentioned not getting into Israeli politics, so we'll skip that part. But going back to the Green Party, you got credit for recently writing an article in the paper about a police, essentially, in George Floyd and some of the conversations I guess we're having in our world today. But you didn't explicitly write the article. It was from a group that put the article together. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about it.
Well, the New London Green Party, it isn't quite unique. There are two Green parties in local Green parties in Connecticut that also have town committees, which Wyndham and New London are the two Green parties, local Green parties with town committees. And we formed the town committee in 2008 for a number of reasons that were pretty practical. It's like when you have campaigns, if you have a town committee, you can have a bank account that stays active, during the campaign and between campaigns. And after running people in local municipal elections since 2001 and opening a bank account every July and closing it every January was just a pain. And the other issue was if you have a town committee, you're on record with the State Election Enforcement Commission, and if something happens and the press wants to get in touch with you, they get a contact person. Back in 2003, there was a problem with voting machines, the old lever voting machines. They were not calibrated correctly in the municipal election, and they didn't let people vote for city council and board of ed at-large elections. They wouldn't let you vote for more than one person in each column. And it was discovered around 10 after 6 in the morning, the first time someone tried to do that. And they switched to paper ballots, and there weren't enough paper ballots. And it was really a big mess. And the Republican Party and the Green Party filed a complaint with the SEC. And we realized that the reporters didn't know who to talk to in the Green Party because we were sort of off record. So we did become a town committee, and the opinion piece was actually written by our collaboratively by our 9 town committee members. And I do want to mention that a year ago we had a similar letter, just a letter to the editor, so it was much shorter. At about this time in budget season, that was on the same subject, that we needed to start thinking about transferring funds from policing to some other things. It didn't draw so much attention, but this was kind of a follow-up from my point of view.
And I tend to agree with you about moving funds. I do think when we talk about defunding the police, that may have not been the right terms.
Yeah. It's so hard to frame things the right way. I'll come back to the policing, but in the Medicare for all, universal health care, fight or advocacy, I've talked to people who say, I don't want Medicare for all because Medicare doesn't cover dental or vision, and it's like, in Connecticut for a statewide thing, we could just say Husky for all, and I think that would work. But for a national term, Medicaid is probably closer, or TRICARE. Some of these other public models are probably closer to what a universal health care system would look like than Medicare does. But because Medicare, is universally known and doesn't have a stigma attached, there were some people who said, okay, Medicare for All Act on the national. And just that framing causes some confusion. And I do think defunding the police causes confusion, but I'm not sure I know what a better term is.
Yeah, I think you have to, when you're trying to do something, you have to come up with a catchy phrase. I'm not sure like reallocation of funds is all that.
No, and even shifting funds or, yeah. And, you know, yeah, it's really hard to do the, you know, to frame these things correctly. So,
but the basic idea of I'll call it the editorial or op-ed, is that we should be moving funds around to help mental health or address mental health issues.
And other critical needs. This started last year when we were doing research, and I looked, you know, and you mentioned before the show, and it is very true that the facts that we stated were things that happened between 2009 and 2014, I think.
Yeah.
We had a longer list to start with. This was kind of put together in two phases, and after Lee Elsey had his piece in the day paper in late January, and the headline was something about complaints about the New London police are, you know, groundless or something,
sure,
without substance, and that was patently not true. There were reasons.
Substance.
There is substance. So that was the original idea, but it took so long, and as we got into budget season, it's like, this isn't just a complaint against Lee Elsey. We want to think about what is a path forward. Right. So we cut down some of the things in the list. But, you know, I have to say, I am, and some people might not see me as this, but I'm really a fiscal conservative. I grew up in Philadelphia in a row house, and I saw how people of pretty modest means could live a high quality of life using resources very efficiently. Sure. And I wouldn't say I'm stingy about things. I don't, you know, vote no on the budget, but I like to see a return on the investment. So the way I come to this, it's like I live, you know, in a pretty regular street in New London. And, you know, it's an old block. It was a subdivision that was built around 1900. And, you know, maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but, you know, we know our neighbors. We try to be good neighbors. And we don't have an alarm system. And
yeah, maybe you shouldn't say that, Ronna.
Yeah, anyone who passes our house. I mean, we don't have anything worth stealing, really. But to me, the way we live is much more financially, financially responsible or financially conservative than if we were jerks to our neighbors and had to buy a security system.
Sure.
And, you know, I've been part of the peace movement for a long time, and, you know, one of the slogans that I really like is "peace is cheaper." You know, it's like, and so I'm not kind of fiscal conservative. That it's like, if you can create systems that can meet people's needs without using more resources than you need to, then you should.
So I guess one of the questions I have, we had talked, or you had mentioned it, that I brought it up, about how some of these are older issues, or not issues, but older events.
Right.
And I wondered if we've gotten better over time, but then I also wonder, where do we go from here?
Well, that is a good question. Where do we go from here? I do think if you look at, so we started looking at budgets a year ago and discovered that New London, I went through budgets of every town in Connecticut with a population between 25,000 and 30,000. And New London had at least a dozen more police officers than every other town in our size range. And people say, yes, but we should be comparing us with Hartford or whatever, and not with other towns in our size range. And I don't really buy that, because what is the underlying thought here? That poor people are more likely to be criminals? That a diverse population is more likely to have crime? Why do we need more resources? Or if we need more resources, are police officers the resources we need more than New Milford or Cheshire or Newington, the other towns that are in our size range, that are much larger, in land area than New London. But why is there really more crime here than there is there? And I lived in Waterford for about 15 years in Pleasure Beach as a renter before I moved to New London. And, there was quite a bit of crime there, and no one had this idea that it was a dangerous place to live. But there was a crack house a block away. Everyone in the neighborhood knew it. And we had a lot of police officers who lived in the neighborhood, from state troopers down to local police. And I knew there was a crack house there for about a year and a half before it got shut down. So I feel like there are a lot of internalized feelings about New London and poorer communities that need more policing. And I think we have to kind of get beyond that and think, well, yes, the people who live here might have more needs, but are those needs, do they amount to needing more policing, or are there other services that are needed?
And I tend to agree with you on that. I think one of the issues I have, and I don't know if it's an issue with me or just when you get a 911 call, I called 911, and I see a little blip, something, and I don't know what it is. The only place I know to call is the police.
Yeah.
Because I don't know who else I'd call.
Yeah.
At least right now.
Right.
And so we send a police officer, but if there's a domestic dispute, do you send a police officer? Do you send mental? I mean, it takes. I think it would take careful planning, and studying and knowing where we are and making it work. It doesn't mean we can't do it. And I mean, we're only 27,000 people.
Right.
We're only 5.5 miles, and you can get from your house to anywhere else in New London.
Right.
In a very quick amount of time. And then also we have other communities to pull people from, like they have to pull from us, just like the fire department.
Absolutely.
But I think this is a conversation that's going to continue for a while.
Yeah, part of my perspective is influenced by the fact for 12 years I was a home visitor for Head Start in New London. And so when I heard, the police will have social workers riding with them for when, it's really a mental health or a social service issue. And I'm thinking, 12 years, I went to people's houses all around New London. I never had a police escort. Federal law actually requires that home visitors go into people's houses even if they're not in safe neighborhoods. I remember at one point there was a homicide on Mountain Avenue, and I was visiting a different family on Mountain Avenue, and I saw in the paper that the visiting nurses were having a police escort for their visits. We never had police escorts. They didn't even issue me a cell phone for the first few years I was doing it. And I think non-armed people are much more competent than they're assumed to be, or much more capable of dealing with crises without resorting or needing that kind of backup.
And I think my fear, although I agree with you there, if I call 911 and I don't recognize what the circumstances are and I don't describe it accurately to an operator, then who do we send?
Who do we? Yeah, I don't know. It's a big issue. Unfortunately, though, I think one of the quotes in the article. Well, I think from the gentleman who was in that public community conversation from the Department of Justice, that if you look at
we might have a call, Ronna.
Oh, we might.
I've never done a call. Do you want to try a call?
Oh, sure. I'm good to try a call. I forget how to do it. The phone has actually changed. I don't know. Do you hear us? Oh, well, we don't hear.
Oh, Ronna, keep going.
Okay. Okay, they'll try again or whatever.
I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, and now I kind of lost my track, but train of thought.
So who do we send?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't, it is an issue. I'm not really sure what the answer is, but what this gentleman from Department of Justice mentioned is if you look at budgets over the last 20 years or whatever, you see that conventional public safety, police departments and sometimes fire departments have gotten more and more funding, and we've actually lost, proportionately education funding and other social service funding. So those services that were available in the past have already been defunded.
Well, and you mentioned it, or your group
Yeah.
mentions it here, especially the social services. Not so much the education part, that's not stressed in here, but
Right.
access to services which would help people so that they may not have to call 911, or I don't have to call 911 because
Right.
they're being dealt with ahead of time proactively. I wouldn't say it's a war on social services, but if we have less and less, that probably means
Yeah.
you're going to have more and more mental call-ins type of
Yeah.
things. And yeah, I'm not sure there's a perfect answer.
I don't know that, well, there is no perfect answer, and we don't expect perfect lives, but another thing, issue that has been kind of a passion for me for a long time is like the war on drugs and how it changed policing. I know I was talking to some young person, my kid's age, your age more or less, who had grown up in Stonington, who said, we used to smoke pot on our porch all the time. We never saw police cars passing by. But and that's when they were teenagers, high schoolers. But if you see a New Londoner who lives in public housing and they're smoking pot outside, it's a much different situation and a much more highly criminalized situation. I see we have 5 minutes, so
yeah. I want to get to that, but
yeah.
real quick, you make note about that in here. The disproportionate policing depending upon minorities or different groups, and it's an issue that we'll take up on another show.
Yes,
but we're going to have a little fun, maybe.
Yes,
another
let's.
war, I guess you have, or passion, is attempting to keep our city clean, which is something.
Oh my gosh!
I'm passionate about as well, doing some of the garbage committees.
Yes.
But are you on New London Trees?
I'm not on New London Trees.
Well, we're going to talk about it.
But
or you're going to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about New London Trees as such, but since about 2012, Susan Munger and I have collaborated on doing a walk in New London for New London Trails Week. And we started out Riverside Park, and we did one in Mitchell Woods. And the past 5 years or so, we've collaborated with Maggie Redfern and done things sometimes in the Arboretum, but sometimes other places. So last year the walks were canceled, but they're back this year. And it's on Saturday, June 6th, there will be a walk.
Is it June 5th or 6th?
June 5th.
Okay, good.
Okay, yeah, there's something else on June 6th. We're painting the intersection on June 6th.
So you're busy.
Yeah, on Saturday, June 5th at 10 a.m., we're going to do a walk in Bates Woods. And when we did a pre-walk about 3 or 4 weeks ago, it was a mess. So we have scheduled a Bates Woods cleanup this Saturday at 2 p.m., 2 to 4, and we're going to try to clean up Bates Woods. It is the largest public open space in New London, and it is really fantastic and so unknown and so underutilized.
So the pickup, it's sponsored by New London Trees?
It's sponsored by New London Trees, but we're, if we can get a Bates Woods, Friends of Bates Woods group together.
I think you have a new project, Ronna.
That would be awesome. And I will say Riverside Park Conservancy has agreed to, be a fiscal sponsor for a Bates Woods group if they'd want to, if we can find people to do it.
And so on the flyer it says, bags and gloves will be provided.
Right, and I think we'll have water, but, we won't have pizza like last week. Yeah, we didn't want to overlap with all the other city things. So, sure. But we hope people turn out for the cleanup this week and for the walk next month.
Well, and I think it's important. I mean, I walking down the street, if you happen to see something, pick it up. I'm not saying people litter, but they do. But also, we litter ourselves if we have our recycling buckets out and things blow away. And my garbage day is Friday. I guarantee it's windy and raining every time, and things blow away, and then the buckets blow away, and through no fault of anyone's, or out of malice, it's just that's what happens. And then downtown we kind of have the funky garbage bags sometimes that.
Someone was telling me that they are funky, but they kind of work. But I can't get over the funky, but I am glad they work.
They do work. So a couple last questions. We have a few more minutes left. So what's on the plate for Ron? I know you said June 5th. You're doing the trails, but what else is coming up for you or the Green Party or even your husband?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Well, this year we are starting to have think about Riverside Park activities again. We'll start having monthly cleanups, maybe the first Saturday of the month at Riverside Park, because it's hard to clean up. And what else are we doing? And we are planning to have a big event there in September. Hopefully we can do it and not, have to distance too much. And gosh, I don't know, just, keeping ahead of the weeds is like, and I'll tell you, the Buy Nothing group has been great because I'm trying to downsize my life. So
Ronna's returning on Facebook. There's a group where if you have something in your house that you don't want, Ronna might take it. Or if
no, I don't take anything. I just give.
But people put pictures up.
People do. Yes.
In fact, one of my friends, my wife was getting rid of things, and she thought they would see a picture of me next that she was giving away.
Oh, Bob has not gotten paranoid like that, which is good.
But it is a fascinating group, and we've utilized it where if you have something you're trying to get rid of and someone can use it, someone will chime in relatively quickly. I'm sure during our telecast tonight, you put up some sort of jars. I bet they're gone.
They might be gone, and I've gotten rid of stuff that my son, when he moved to California, left with us, a big buckwheat pillow someone wanted, and we got rid of a deep fryer that...
you got rid of that too. I saw that
yes.
up there.
And that person took our staple gun too.
Oh, good.
So it was great.
You mentioned something I'm sort of passionate about. I post pictures on Facebook of my garden all the time. And it's fascinating that the weeds, they come from nowhere. Mushrooms come from nowhere. And I guess the bane of my existence lately is those wild scallions that seem to, they go all over the place, and there's way too many. But I'm excited about the garden season, and I'll give a little plug. I think the greens are part of Fresh.
Yes.
But I want to thank Ronna for coming in tonight.
Yeah,
I'm not
thanks.
Karen Paul, but I'm Bryan Doughty, and I will see everybody next month on the first Wednesday of the month.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks, Bryan.
What time is it?